Taking my pins out. Okay, so before I turn this right side out, I want to do an additional step. So we've got 5/8 of an inch here. And if we were to turn this right side out, that ends up being a lot of fabric bulking up in the corners. So we are going to trim down our seam allowance length. So I'm gonna get my big sewing scissors out, and I'm gonna cut to about 1/4 or 1/8 of an inch from the stitch line all the way around. You don't have to measure it, just get kind of close, a little more than halfway of this width. If it makes you feel better, you can measure around. I'm just gonna eyeball it. Be careful though that you're not cutting so close that you cut through your stitching, or that there isn't any distance between the stitching and the fabric. We do need some fabric sticking out from the edge of the stitching line, because if we don't do that, if it gets really close to that stitching line, it can pull apart when you put pressure or tension on that seam. So I'm going all the way around, just like this. Okay, so now our seam allowance is a lot smaller. This gave us a nice clean seam and makes this smaller, so when we turn this right side out, it's not nearly as bulky. So now we can turn this right side out through the top, push everything out, and we've got a bit of a pocket shape. So we want to take this to the iron now and press this seam, okay? Okay, so we turned this right side out. I was silly. I need to turn it back wrong side out, because I want to press this seam before we flip it, just like we did with the pocket opening here. Get everything pushed back out. Okay, we're gonna just press on top of that stitching, lock it in. Fantastic. Okay. Now, typically on a pattern piece like this, a sharp curve like this, we would need to clip our curve. But because we've cut down the seam allowance and it's so narrow, we don't actually need to do that for this part of the process because we've cut it down. So now we're gonna turn it right side out. Get your hand in there and really push that curve out nice and smooth. We're gonna do kind of like what we did before with this pocket opening. We're gonna pull at the seam, get everything pulled out nice and flat and right on top of each other. So when we go to press this seam that we've sewn, everything is nice and smooth. You don't want like this big tuck in between those layers. That's gonna make for a not nice looking pocket. So I am pulling at all of the seams. If you want, you can use like a pencil, or I've got this thing right here called a point turner. Same thing as a pencil. Put it in, smooth it around the curve on the inside to get everything to sit out nice and flat. Do about that much. Press, rotate this and continue around. Make sure that's out nice and smooth. And feel free to do this in sections. It's actually a lot easier to do in sections than to try and get this whole seam rolled out and staying where you want and pressing it all at once. I would recommend at this point in the process, before you do the next set of sewing instructions, that you have me take a look at your pressing work so that we can make sure that this part is nice and clean before you move on. Okay. go over the whole thing because it makes me feel better. Okay, so now we're ready for our next sewing step. Now we're going to sew along the outside edge of our pocket. We're going to top stitch kind of like we did here, but this time we're not going to sew right on the edge. We actually want to enclose this amount of our seam allowance on the inside. So if we stitch it, it's all in there and there's no rough raw edges. So to ensure that we have completely covered all of that we've cut down, we're going to stitch at 5/8 of an inch all the way around. Again, we're going to top stitch at 5/8 of an inch. Start at the top corner just like I did before. Back stitch and go all the way around. If you would like, you can pin all of your layers together just like you did before. But if you've done a really good job pressing, you can skip pinning these layers together. But if you're coming back and starting at this step at the beginning of class and your pocket's been in your backpack for a bit, you're going to either want to repress it to make sure that all of the fibers are holding on to each other, or do the pinning. Okay, so now we've got this top stitching that goes all the way around. If we were to open this up and look at the inside, if you want, you can turn the whole thing wrong side out, and you can see that your raw cut edges are completely enclosed in that seam. That makes for a nice, clean finish of your pocket. And if you're using a contrasting thread, it's a nice little decorative element. So get this all the way back out. And then we can see, here's our pocket. We are almost done. We just need to add the tie top.